Hello and welcome to Barcast Audio. This is our Secured Transactions Essay Workshop. This workshop is designed to help walk you through a Secured Transactions essay as tested on the bar exam. We are going to be walking through an MEE multi-state essay exam question. I'll begin by reading the question. Take special care to note to yourself any issues and, most importantly, any facts that stand out to you as I read through this essay. I'd suggest you rewind and listen through the question twice before attempting to solve it. It just allows you to get a better grip of the facts and the issues and make sure you don't miss anything as you're going through it. Now, without further ado, let's jump right into our essay workshop on secured transactions. Archer Comics is in the business of buying and selling rare comic books. Archer frequently executes comic book sales for prices well in excess of $50,000. In addition to restoring comics to be resold, Archer will also repair comics for private collectors. In most repair transactions, Archer requires payment in cash when the comic is picked up by the collector. It does, however, allow some of its repeat customers to obtain repairs on credit, with full payment due 30 days after completion of the repair. In those cases, the payment obligation is not secured by any collateral, and the payment terms are handwritten on the receipt. Archer maintains a stock of rare and valuable printer paper that it uses in comic book restoration. Archer also owns a variety of tools used in restoration work, including a machine called a Rube Goldberg machine, which is used to reshape an otherwise mangled comic book. 6 months ago, Archer borrowed $1 million from bank. The loan agreement, which was signed by Archer, grants bank a security interest in all of Archer's inventory and accounts, as those terms are defined in the Uniform Commercial Code. On the same day, bank filed a properly completed financing statement in the appropriate state filing office. The financing statement indicated the collateral as, quote, inventory and accounts. Last month, Archer sold the most valuable comic book in its inventory, the infamous Super Toad, to a collector for $100,000. The collector paid for this book in cash. The sale was made by Archer in accordance with its usual practices. The collector, who has done business with Archer for many years, was aware that Archer regularly borrows money from bank and that bank had a security interest in Archer's entire inventory. The collector did not, however, know anything about the terms of Archer's agreement with bank. Archer is 15 days late in making payment currently due on its loan from bank. Bank's loan officer, who is worried about bank's possible inability to collect the debt owed by Archer, has asked whether the following items of property are collateral that can be reached by bank as possible sources of payment. 1. Used comic books for sale in Archer's store. 2. Archer's rights to payment from customers for repair services obtained on credit. 3. Comics in Archer's possession that Archer is repairing for their owners. 4. The Rube Goldberg machine used by Archer in comic book restoration. 5. The Super Toad comic book that was sold to the collector. Yesterday, a creditor of Archer obtained a judicial lien on all of Archer's personal property. 1. In which, if any of the items listed above, does bank have an enforceable security interest? 2. For the items in which bank has an enforceable security interest, is bank's claim superior to that of the judicial lien creditor? Explain. Okay, so now that we've read through this essay, what issues stuck out to you? What facts stuck out to you? I'd suggest you go back and listen to the hypo again just to get in the practice of identifying these issues and these facts contemporaneously. Again, we're looking for facts to connect to our rule statements. Once you identify the issue, you can identify the rule, and then you just want to connect the important facts to those rules, and that's how we're going to score points in analysis on the bar exam. So go back, listen, and come back in a minute or two. All right. So first of all, it's clear from the fact pattern that this is a security interest question. We have a creditor seeking to enforce its security interest in a person or business's personal property. That should generally send your mind into secure transactions mode right away. The facts here then present us with a number of different pieces of personal property, which we are asked to identify the value of the security interest by the bank and if the bank can ultimately recover a security interest. The facts here then present us with a number of different pieces of personal property, including Archer's comic books, its rights to payment, its equipment, and then asks us to assess the bank's security interest in each of these pieces of personal property. Now, to begin, we know this is a secured transactions question. This may actually seem so basic that you might be tempted to skip ahead, Remember that you need to write these essays like you're explaining the hypo to a third grader. That means we start with the big picture rule and we narrow from there. And we begin again by stating the rule for secured transactions. Here, it would appear that the bank had an enforceable and attached security interest in the Archer property described in the loan and the security agreement. The general rule for a valid security interest is as follows. To attach a security interest, 1, either the debtor must authenticate a security agreement granting the creditor a security interest in collateral that describes the collateral, or the creditor must take possession or control of the collateral. 2, the creditor must give value. And 3, the debtor must have rights in the collateral. Let's connect each of these elements with a fact now. First, Archer signed an agreement that provided and described the collateral contemplated as all of Archer's inventory and accounts, as those terms are defined by the Uniform Commercial Code. Next, value was provided by way of the bank's $50,000 loan. Third, the security interest agreement explicitly provides the bank rights as to Archer's inventory and accounts, thereby satisfying the third element of this rule. So we have an attached security interest here. We've made those connections with the rules. First, Archer's signed agreement. Second, the value of the $50,000 loan provided by the bank. And third, the agreement explicitly provided for the bank's rights in the inventory and accounts of Archer. 3 elements, 3 facts connected to the rule. That's where our points is to be found on this first section of the question. Thus, because all 3 elements have been satisfied, the bank's security interest in Archer's inventory and accounts has attached and will be enforceable. Okay, from here we have 2 tasks. First, we need to assess the bank's interest in the various bits of inventory. Then once we assess the interest, we have to do an analysis of priority of interest in terms of the bank's interest versus that of the judicial lien creditor that is mentioned in part 2 of the question. So let's start with each bit of Archer's inventory. This is the meat and potatoes of this question here. So to begin, we need the rule for what constitutes inventory and accounts under the UCC. So generally, inventory are 1, goods held for sale or lease, or 2, consist of raw materials, work in progress, or materials used in a business. Moreover, accounts are rights to payment of a monetary obligation. Let's start by asking whether the bank has a security interest in the used comic books for sale in Archer's store. Here, the used comic books are being held by Archer for resale. Thus, they are inventory property and are subject to the bank's security interest. That satisfies the first rule here. Goods held for sale. They're being held for sale. They're used comic books. They are inventory. The bank would have a security interest in them. Next, let's talk about Archer's rights to payment for services on credit. Here, the bank's security interest includes Archer's accounts. Thus, their rights to repayment would be subject to the bank's security interest. Again, that's part 2 here. Accounts or rights to repayment. Clearly, the second bit of Archer's accounts here would be subject to the bank's security interest. After that, the comic that is in Archer's possession would not be subject to the bank's security interest, as it would not be considered inventory property, because it was not being held by Archer for the purposes or sale of lease. It's being held only for repair and is not owned by Archer. Thus, the comic would not be subject to the bank's security interest. Again, a fact, connect to a rule. We see the distinction there. That's the points right there. That is how we're going to score highly on these essay questions. Next up, the Rube Goldberg machine. The Rube Goldberg machine would not be subject to the bank's security interest because it is not inventory. Under the UCC, equipment is a catch-all category of goods used within the business. Here, the Rube Goldberg machine is not being held for sale or for lease by Archer, but instead is more likely to be identified as equipment. Thus, because the bank's security interest did not include equipment, the Rube Goldberg machine would not be subject to the security interest. Okay, this finally brings us to the Super Toad comic and whether it was included in the bank's security interest. What facts guide us here? Specifically, the facts tell us that the purchaser of the Super Toad comic knew that this comic was considered a part of Archer's inventory, so preliminarily it would appear as though the Super Toad comic would be subject to the bank's security interest, but that's not what's really being tested here. Instead, the facts here give rise to the buyer in the ordinary course rule. The rule here is that a buyer in the ordinary course of business takes free of a security interest created by the seller. A buyer in the ordinary course of business is one who buys goods, 2, in the ordinary course of business, 3, from a merchant who is in the business of selling goods of that kind, 4, in good faith, and 5, without knowledge that the sale violates the rights of another in the same goods. Here, it appears that all of these elements have been satisfied. The buyer purchased the Super Toad comic from Archer, a comic book merchant, in good faith and did so without the knowledge that the sale might violate the rights of bank in the comic. Thus, as a buyer in the ordinary course, the buyer would take the Super Toad comic free of the bank's security interest. So here we have a judicial creditor who is attempting to execute its rights versus the rights of the bank in Archer's inventory. Now, when you see a question of competing interests in a secure transactions essay, you should always think of perfection, because perfection is one of the most important elements when it comes to priority of interests. So the first question in identifying perfection is whether the bank's interest was perfected. Let's talk the rule here. To begin, a security interest is subordinate to the rights of a person who becomes a lien creditor before the security interest is perfected. A secured party can perfect a security interest by 1. Filing a financing statement, 2. Possessing the collateral, 3. Controlling the collateral, or 4. Perfecting automatically. A security interest in accounts may be perfected only by filing. Here, the most important fact from our hypo is simply that the bank filed a properly completed financing statement in an appropriate state filing office on the same day that the loan was executed. And this financing statement indicated the collateral as inventory and accounts. Therefore, the bank's interest in the comic books was perfected before the judicial lien creditor took its lien. Therefore, the bank's security interest would take priority over the lien creditor's interest. That does it for us here with this secure transactions essay workshop. I know we moved through this essay relatively quickly, but this is sort of a top-down discussion, important discussion of how you should attack these security questions on the bar exam essays. Be sure to check us out at barcastaudio.com. We have all sorts of essay workshops, essay attack sheets, audio outlines, everything you need to pass the bar exam to excel in law school. Check us out at barcastaudio.com. Until then, I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye now.